Tehran, the Paris of the Middle East. At least that's what people used to call it. In 2025, it's known for something else entirely. A city so overwhelmed that the government literally declared a public holiday just to get people to stop using so much water. A power grid that fails so often that many residents avoid elevators altogether because too many times they've turned into death traps during long blackouts. And when schools close for pollution days instead of snow days, you know something has gone deeply, painfully wrong. So what happened? How did a city once compared to Paris, hosting Hollywood celebrities, international film festivals, and drowning in oil money, end up becoming the exact opposite of that? Well, that's this story. For most of Persian history, Tehran barely existed. While other cities were seats of empire and power, Tehran was basically a village living in the shadow of Ray, an older, more important city that had even been the Seljuk capital back in the 11th century. Even by 1786, when Aga Muhammad Khan of the Qajar dynasty moved the capital to Tehran, it was still a rural backwater compared to Persia's great urban centers. But that decision changed everything. The choice was strategic. Tehran sat at the crossroads of major trade routes, protected by mountains but still accessible for commerce. Within a decade, the population tripled. By the early 1800s, it reached around 50,000 as merchants, craftsmen, officials, everyone poured into the new capital. The city transformed fast. By the mid-19th century, new walls with 12 ornate gates surrounded Tehran, and it would have looked almost unrecognizable to anyone who'd lived there before. Still, all of that was just the warm-up. In 1921, Reza Pahlavi took power in a military coup. 5 years later, he crowned himself Shah. He was obsessed with modernization, determined to drag Iran into the 20th century, whether people liked it or not. He centralized power ruthlessly and had a reputation for having zero patience for opposition. And within a few years, he decided the city itself had to be rebuilt. Entire sections were demolished. The old mud walls and ancient gates that had defined Tehran for centuries, gone. In their place came broad boulevards inspired by Paris, new government buildings, royal palaces. The University of Tehran opened in 1934, part of a push to build modern education in a city long dominated by religious institutions. The Trans-Iranian Railway finally linked the capital to both the Persian Gulf and the Caspian Sea, turning Tehran from an isolated mountain city into the beating heart of a modernizing country. It wasn't just urban planning. It was basically an urban revolution. Reza's son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, presided over what many remember as Tehran's golden age, at least if you were on the government's good side. And yes, after one more coup in the 1950s, but that's another story. Then came the oil boom of the 60s and 70s, and it was like rocket fuel. Oil revenues exploded from about $34 million in 1954 to around $20 billion just 2 decades later, and much of that money poured straight into the capital. The population jumped from 1.5 million in 1956 to 3 times that by 1976, one of the fastest urban growth rates in history. Photos from that era make Tehran look like Paris or New York. Modern cars, Western fashion, shiny avenues. Hollywood arrived through the Tehran International Film Festival. Elizabeth Taylor walked red carpets. French boutiques lined Pahlavi Avenue. The symphony filled halls with Beethoven. Iranian cinema started winning international awards. It looked like a dream, but the dream was built on fear. While the elite partied in North Tehran villas, the Savak secret police tortured dissidents in Evin prison's basement chambers. By the late 1970s, the city was basically at war with itself. The capital looked modern, but to many people it felt alien, imposed from above, disconnected from identity, held together by force. Protests erupted. University students led the way. Marxists and Islamists, normally enemies, found common cause. Bazaar merchants resented foreign competition. Religious conservatives hated Western excess. Intellectuals choked under censorship.
Workers watched oil wealth flow everywhere except to them. And the revolution was coming. In January 1979, the Shah fled the country, reportedly clutching a handful of Iranian soil as he boarded his plane. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile after 14 years to a massive welcome. Millions lined the streets from the airport to Behesht-e Zahra cemetery. And within days, Tehran changed faster than it ever had before. The hijab went from basically banned to mandatory almost overnight. Women who wore miniskirts on Monday were wrapped in chadors by Friday. Nightclubs were padlocked and turned into Revolutionary Guard checkpoints. Alcohol sales were banned, then possession was criminalized, so restaurants and shops dumped thousands of bottles down the drain. One foreigner later said something like, "Within weeks, we were all leaving. The party was over." Embassies evacuated staff, international schools closed, and the Iran that had existed just months earlier was already becoming a memory, especially after the U.S. embassy was stormed and diplomats were taken hostage. But here's the thing. Tehran didn't just become more conservative. It developed a split personality. As one journalist put it, in Iran, you live two lives, your private inside life and your public outside life, and that seeped into everything. To live in Tehran, you had to learn how to lie. Behind closed doors, parties continued with smuggled alcohol and banned music, always with the fear of raids. Satellite dishes, illegal but everywhere, sprouted on rooftops so people could watch the outside world. Dating went underground. Couples met in parks and cafes while scanning for morality police. Meanwhile, the new government, isolated and desperate, nationalized banks and industries. Billions of assets were seized from elite families. Property values in North Tehran collapsed as wealth fled the country. Villas became committee headquarters or stood empty with drained pools. The stock exchange practically stopped functioning. Foreign investment evaporated. And then the brain drain hit hard. Doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, anyone educated and able to leave left. Within 2 years, an estimated 180,000 educated Iranians had fled. The revolution promised justice and prosperity. It delivered neither. And then, things got even worse.
In September 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. The brutality is almost impossible to fully describe. Years of war, chemical weapons, mass casualties. At first, Tehran felt far away, tucked into the mountains, distant from the southwestern battlefields. But the war crept closer. Young men disappeared from the streets, drafted into militias. Black banners hung from balconies to announce the death of a relative, usually a young man, often under 18. The real nightmare came during the War of the Cities from 1985 to 1988. Saddam began launching missiles at Iranian cities, and Tehran became a priority target. Scud missiles hit randomly, without warning. Hospitals, schools, bazaars. Air raid sirens became the soundtrack of daily life. Families slept fully clothed so they could run for shelters in the middle of the night. By 1988, bombardments were so intense that over 1 million people fled Tehran for the countryside. Those who stayed said it felt like being a sitting duck. Death could fall from the sky at any moment. It left scars that never really healed. After the war ended, there was real hope. The country was finally at peace, and Khomeini had died. His successor lacked the same charisma, and for a moment, the future felt open. Under Mayor Ghulam Hussein Karbashi in the 1990s, Tehran saw something like a renaissance. Parks doubled. The long-promised metro system finally moved forward. The metro opening soon after was symbolic, one of the first major infrastructure projects completed since the revolution. For a moment, it seemed like Tehran might find normal again. But two powerful forces were already shaping its future: a massive population boom and suffocating international sanctions. Tehran grew from about 5 million around the revolution to nearly double by 2006. Today, the greater metro area holds over 15 million people, nearly 20% of Iran's population packed into less than 1% of its land. And it wasn't natural growth. After the war, rural migrants, Afghan refugees, and students flooded into the capital, searching for opportunity or escape. But the city rebuilt in the 1930s had been designed for about 2 million. Tehran wasn't just over capacity, it was living at something like 7 times the limit. So infrastructure started breaking, water pipes bursting daily, sewage backing into streets, the electrical grid overloaded. Traffic became apocalyptic, commutes stretched into hours, people literally breathing exhaust the entire time. And then the isolation intensified. Sanctions came early and they tightened over decades. The currency collapsed so dramatically it's hard to even wrap your head around. From around 70 reals to the dollar before the revolution to around 10,000 by 2010 to over 500,000 today. Imagine saving your whole life and watching your savings become nearly worthless. But the most devastating consequence isn't just economics, it's the air. Tehran's geography, once its strategic advantage, became a trap. The city sprawls across the southern slopes of the Alborz Mountains, forming a natural bowl. Pollution gets trapped under heat domes for much of the year, and winter temperature inversions seal it in even worse. From the hills, you can see it, a thick gray-brown haze sitting over the city like a shroud. In 2012 alone, thousands died from air pollution, more than a dozen people every single day just from breathing. Schools routinely close for smog days. Elderly people with respiratory illnesses become prisoners in their own homes, and those with money escape to the mountains. Pollution regularly spikes above hazardous levels. It comes from everywhere. Millions of vehicles, many old, burning low-quality fuel, industrial zones running constantly, and when fuel shortages hit, power plants burning heavy fuel oil so toxic it's banned in many countries. And all of it is trapped in Tehran's bowl. People know what's killing them. They just can't get away. The pollution crisis would be bad enough if the city still functioned, but the systems are collapsing. First, the power grid, then the water supply. By summer 2025, things entered a new stage. The government declared a public holiday just to reduce water consumption. Reservoirs hit historic lows. Officials who had long denied rationing began urging residents to buy home water tanks, basically admitting what people had already been living through. The water shuts off, sometimes for days. It hit poorer southern areas first, then spread to wealthier neighborhoods through silent rationing, pressure drops, mysterious nighttime shutoffs, maintenance explanations. In high-rises, when the power goes out, elevators stop, water pumps stop. People carry buckets up 14 floors. And the electric crisis makes everything worse. When the power dies, so does everything. Traffic lights, ATMs, air conditioning, water pumps, even internet access. Businesses that can afford generators run them, but fewer can every year. And the heat? During an August heat wave, temperatures repeatedly exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. This isn't open-a-window weather. Elderly people were rushed to hospitals when AC died. High-rise residents struggled just to survive daily life without power and water. One resident summed it up like this: "Nothing works. No electricity, no water, no internet, no peace. This is already hell."
Sanctions, yes, but also corruption. Ask ordinary residents what's happening, and many will say sanctions first, but corruption is right there next to it. And here's the ugly truth. Sanctions come from outside. Corruption is something cultivated from within. Iran ranks near the bottom globally on corruption indexes, and in Tehran, corruption isn't just a problem, it's the operating system. It runs from the top down. The Revolutionary Guard's massive business empire, no-bid contracts, connected companies controlling construction and infrastructure. If you want to build anything significant, you're paying powerful people far more than it's worth. And corruption isn't abstract. It kills.
The Plasco building collapse in 2017 is the perfect example. A fire started, and within hours, the entire high-rise collapsed, killing 20 firefighters. Investigations pointed to what everyone suspected: ignored safety violations, political protection, rubber-stamped certificates, and scandals kept coming. Prime land and luxury apartments transferred to insiders for cheap, journalists detained for exposing it, officials promoted instead of punished. Corruption doesn't just steal money, it steals competence. When contracts go to the connected instead of the capable, you end up with a city that literally cannot function. And the tragedy is, too many people in power profit from dysfunction. The parasite is making money. Why would it cure the host? If people thought things couldn't get worse, June 2025 proved them wrong. Between June 13th and 24th, Israel achieved air superiority over Tehran and other Iranian cities, showing just how vulnerable the country was. The moment that stunned everyone came when state TV headquarters was bombed during a live broadcast, debris falling, an anchor fleeing mid-sentence, the screen cutting to black. Then came the bombing of Avon Prison, with multiple impacts and heavy casualties. Residents reported smoke, sealed roads, sirens for hours. And in a surreal twist, the morality police largely disappeared from the streets for a brief moment, women walking without headscarves in this strange mix of freedom and terror. Thousands fled. Those who stayed slept away from windows, used metro stations as bomb shelters, filled bathtubs while water still flowed, and waited out information blackouts while explosions echoed across the city. When a ceasefire took hold, something fundamental had broken in Tehran. The city that houses the regime's power centers had been exposed as defenseless. The lesson Tehran teaches. Tehran's tragedy isn't written into its mountains. Geography matters, yes, but it doesn't decide everything. Plenty of places with tough geography have thrived. The difference is governance. Tehran's mountains were once an asset. They could be again. Ski resorts an hour from downtown, protection from desert storms. The pollution trap could be managed with real emission standards, functional transit, and serious industrial planning. Other mountain cities turned geography into an advantage. Tehran didn't fail because of where it was built, it failed because of how it was run. And if Tehran's history teaches anything, it's that this city has survived the unimaginable before. The question now isn't whether it can be fixed. What will happen after now? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, feel free to share, like, and subscribe.